This webinar is being recorded. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules that I'd like to go through. Everyone here today is in a listen-only mode. I do encourage questions, however, so at the end of this webinar, I'm going to provide you with an email address that I check regularly, and I'm certainly happy to answer anybody's questions that you might have. Because we have well over 300 people enrolled in this webinar, it's difficult to do that live. But rest assured, at the end of tonight's webinar, I'll provide you with that email to ask your questions. Also, before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about myself. By trade, I'm actually a podiatric physician, a podiatrist, but I also have a master's in healthcare management, and as a result, I've worked with and engaged with practices both big and small of all specialties as a healthcare consultant. So today, I'm going to provide you with some insight about this very daunting change that we face come October 1st, and I'm going to provide that insight to you through not only the eyes of an actual provider, but through the eyes of a consultant as well. Today, you're going to see the difference between Icd-10 readiness, Icd-10 tools, and what I consider to be a true Icd-10 solution. We're going to spend some time talking about Icd-10 and the October 1st date and some of the newer rulings that just emerged, but we're also going to be talking about this innovative technology known as the SmartSheet10 technology. And you'll see why this is absolutely not a tool, but a true solution to the Icd-10 transition. Only a solution, in my mind as a consultant, addresses not only the proper code conversion, but addresses the daunting workflow challenges that Icd-10 is going to create for us. And you'll see how that works as I get more into this webinar today, and I actually show you a demonstration of how the SmartSheet10 works. So again, this is being recorded so you could re-listen to it at your leisure, and at the end I'll provide you with an email address that you can contact me should you have any questions. First, let's talk about this delay that took place last year, as well as some newer news that emerged recently from CMS. What you all probably remember last year was when Icd-10 was supposed to start. Our nation's way of coding diagnoses was supposed to change October 1st of last year, but Congress passed and President Obama signed into law 4302, which is the sustainable growth rate patch or doc fix that we all know about. What many in Congress, I believe, weren't aware of was that wrapped up inside of that doc fix bill was a one-year delay in Icd-10. So that brings us to this coming October. Many of us were speculating whether or not even this October Icd-10 was going to emerge. And now we know that most definitely it is. And the reason we know that it is because CMS came out with some new decisions or some new rules regarding the Icd-10 conversion for the next year moving forward. So let's review some of that. What CMS is saying is that they're calling for all physicians to use Icd-10 codes in the correct family in order to qualify for reimbursements. You no longer for this year have to drill down to the most specific Icd-10 code. Submitting a family code will get you reimbursed. And it wasn't until just this week, in fact, that CMS clarified what is actually meant by a family code. And it really boils down to the first three characters of the Icd-10 code. So for example, and this is not my example, this is the actual example that CMS uses for Hodgkin's lymphoma. And you consider the codes that are out there in the world of Icd-10 for Hodgkin's lymphoma. You have C81.00, 0.03, 0.10, and 0.90. Until October 1st of 2016, because of this family flexibility rule that CMS came out with, you can just submit C81.00 and get paid. Please understand that CMS will no longer accept, for dates of services after October 1st, any ICD-9 codes. They must be ICD-10. But the family flexibility rule will allow you to submit the family code and get reimbursed. Now, as a consultant, once again, I want to bring to the surface some concerns I have about this. To me, this is actually a setup for future problems, a setup for future challenges involving our cash flow. So what do I mean by a setup? It's actually teaching us bad behaviors. And you all know that old behaviors are very hard to change once they're set up. The technology is here now to allow you to submit the most specific codes and ignore the family flexibility rule. That's why I believe this is a setup. Furthermore, while C81.00 is correct and sufficient, remember that C81 is not. It has to have the 0.00 to be accepted. To complicate matters even further, this family flexibility applies only to Medicare as we know it, not Medicaid. None of the private healthcare payers have said anything about this flexibility. As far as we know, specificity still matters. So these bad behaviors could actually not only get us in trouble next year, but they could actually even get us in trouble this year as well with other carriers. So please be very cautious how you view this relaxation of ICD-10, because I really doubt that a year from now physicians are going to be happy that CMS actually did this. I know there's some rejoicing and celebrating now, but I really believe that that's going to be short-lived. So let's go over in a broad sense some about the ICD-10 rule so that everybody is on the same page about what ICD-10 means and specificity means. Come October 1st of this year, it is now definitively happening, October 1st. Our nation is converting from ICD-9 to ICD-10. Now, this only affects, please keep in mind, it only affects the way we code outpatient medical diagnoses. To this day, I still get some clients who are confused and they ask me, for example, well, is it going to affect our modifiers and the modifiers that we use? And of course, the answer is no. Modifiers lie on the CPT side of the claim, not on the ICD side of the claim. It's only affecting the medical diagnosis side of an insurance claim. The broad differences between ICD-9 and ICD-10. ICD-9 is mostly numeric characters. There are some exceptions to that, but they're mostly numeric, and they are about 3 to 5 characters in length. There's about 13,000 of these ICD-9 codes. In the world of ICD-10, we move to alphanumeric characters. They always begin with an alpha character. There's 3 to 7 characters in length, and there's about 69,000 of these codes. So you could imagine how much more complex this is going to get and how this can seriously affect our workflow, as you'll see throughout some of the other slides coming up. Again, as I mentioned, I'm not only a provider, but I'm also a consultant, and I'm always looking at workflow, and I'm always looking at the cost associated with workflow. In my mind, the ICD-10 challenge forces us to search for that perfect code, that most specific code. And there's 3 ways essentially of doing this. We could either purchase the ICD-10 books. Now, this is expensive, not only because the books are expensive, but it's expensive because of the search that it takes in human capital, the expense of human capital in finding that most specific code. It could take 15 minutes to find a particular code in some specialties. So in my mind, the books are out of the question. Then you have tools. As I categorize tools, I talk about things such as the GEM mapping programs, and I'll get into what that is in just a bit. The general equivalence mapping programs. These are far better than books. They provide an electronic means of searching, but they still do nothing about the disruptive workflow that the ICD-10 transition is going to create. Then at the other side of the spectrum is what I consider the ideal, and that's categorized as a solution. Only a solution addresses the code and does so in a very, very compliant workflow manner, a very efficient manner. That's where the SmartSheet10 technology fits. It's a true solution. So let's talk first about these books. As I suggested, the books are a very expensive means of getting to that code, particularly when we look at the human capital involved. There are 21 chapters, and I'm not going to bore you with these chapters, but suffice it to say, there are 21 chapters that you would need to look through, organized according to organ systems. It's just a very daunting way of finding that code. In broad sense, there are other differences that create challenges in this transition. For example, laterality matters. If you're a specialty, that laterality affects. That's a complicating factor. And injuries actually create a whole nother roadblock. Injuries are grouped by anatomical site, and they often require what's known as a unique seventh character. So for example, if we're looking at a fracture code requires a unique seventh character based upon whether or not this is an initial exam for a fracture, a subsequent exam, or a sequela. Sequela meaning that the fracture is associated with something else. Just as an example, if the fracture is associated with generalized osteoporosis, it has to be coded as a sequela. Then furthermore, you have to indicate whether the fracture is a closed fracture, an open fracture, if it's routinely healing or delayed healing. These are all these little roadblocks, these hurdles that we need to find a most efficient way to navigate over. So the book's out of the question. Let's talk now about the tools. As I alluded to, there are things called the general equivalence mapping programs. These are readily available. CMS even has a version. These are electronic searches or crosswalks that basically take you from ICD-9 to ICD-10. Now, there's some problems associated with this. There are plenty of codes that are an exact match, and for that a GEMS mapping program is very sufficient. But for those in which there's not an exact match, which means you have to be more specific based upon this unique encounter, a GEMS equivalent program is going to be very insufficient. In fact, I often use the analogy that a GEMS mapping program will take you to the approximate neighborhood that you need to be in, but it often fails to get you to the street, and even more concerning is it fails to take you to the exact house or the exact address that you need to be to get that claim paid. And remember, while we have some flexibility between now and October 1st of 2016, come October of 2016, that flexibility goes away. Your claims will be rejected if you are not using the most specific code. And the thought is to get into that habit right now using the proper technological solutions, because the workflow is critically important. You know, we talk about meaningful use and how troublesome that has been on all of our practices workflow, or PQRS and how troublesome that has been. Well, those are speed bumps compared to ICD-10. ICD-10 is going to be a brick wall, not a speed bump, simply because if you didn't comply with meaningful use or PQRS, sure, you're going to suffer penalties. But if you don't comply with ICD-10, you are simply not going to get paid. And that is a brick wall. So you need to make sure you are focused on this challenge, facing it head on, thinking about your workflow, thinking about your readiness for it so that you can get paid. Now, I'm often challenged with the thought of, okay, so if my claims get rejected, that's really not that big of a problem because somewhere down the road those claims are going to get paid. All it really means is a delay in payment, correct? And my answer to that is absolutely incorrect. Because if you subscribe to this statistic, and this is a true statistic, that the longer it takes a claim to get paid, the more likely it is that it will never get paid. If you subscribe to that, then you understand that there's going to be a proportion of those claims that are delayed that you simply never will get paid. And that causes the cash flow interruption that everybody's talking about, that everybody is concerned with. So that takes us to the solution. The solution being the workflow and code compliant technology that really will help you optimize this transition. And before I get into the actual solution, I want to talk a little bit about what actually is my favorite television program called The Profit. Many people are actual fans of the sister show to this, which is Shark Tank, but on the same network is this television show called The Profit. It's hosted by a venture capitalist. His name is Marcus Lemonis. And what he does is basically go into floundering businesses, and he acts as a turnaround agent and takes an equity piece for doing so. And when he goes in to the business, he principally focuses on one of three things that he finds wrong. It's either a people problem, a process problem, or a product problem. I will tell you that as we move to ICD-10, this is not going to be a people problem. It's not going to be a product problem. It is 100% going to be a process problem of how we navigate to the most specific code in an efficient manner that does not drive up our costs, and does so accurately so it does not drive up our claim rejections. So we're dealing with a process problem, and that's where I want to talk about the SmartSheet10 technology so you can see how it works, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you could actually get a free trial of this by going back to the TriZetto website. Before I show you the demo, please keep in mind as I do this demo that it is extremely an intuitive program, very simple to learn and use. It's also EHR agnostic, meaning that it could be integrated into any electronic health record to make that workflow very seamless for you. And you'll see actually how that works when it's integrated into an electronic health record. But no matter what electronic health record you are, no matter what specialty you are, because the database draws from the CMS database of codes, it's specialty agnostic as well as EHR agnostic. So what you're looking at here now, you're looking at, on the left-hand side of the screen, the actual search engine behind the SmartSheet10. On the right-hand side is the actual database. Now, to start with, I'm going to stay with my world. I already told you that by trade, I'm actually a podiatric physician. So I'm going to first demonstrate this through the eyes of a podiatrist, but I'm going to show you how it works with other specialties as well. If I was a podiatrist and I knew my ICD-9 code for a hallux valgus, which happens to be nothing more than a bunion deformity, if I typed in 735.0 into the search, it immediately takes me to the proper chapter of the ICD-10 book. It immediately takes me to the M20 family. However, I want to practice good habits. I want to start submitting right now the most specific codes. So all I do is click on that family and it opens up an entire new family of more specific codes. And in fact, it's color coded. I know when I'm at the most specific code when I achieve the green codes. Now, ironically, M20.10, which is an unspecified hallux valgus, is a green code, theoretically because some insurance carriers will accept that. But I know better. I know that I have to apply laterality. So it's only when I select that green code does it populate on top here the M20.11 hallux valgus acquired right foot. I know I am at my most specific code now. And if this was integrated into my electronic health record, it would go ahead and populate the claim for me automatically as well. You'll see how that happens just shortly. Now, that's not all the SmartSheet 10 technology does. It does far more than that. Let's take a look at a patient with an ankle sprain. If I had a patient with an ankle sprain and I knew my ICD-9 code of 845.0, I simply type that into the search, and once again on the right-hand side of the screen, it takes me right to the chapter of sprain of unspecified ligament of ankle. Again, I have to click until I see a green code. Knowing that this is a right ankle, when I click the right ankle sprain, it immediately pops up an alert for me to tell me that this is one of those codes that require a unique seventh character. I have to actually code whether or not this is an initial encounter, a subsequent encounter, or a sequela, as I described before. Only after I select that does it, once again, populate the most specific code in addition to applying the unique seventh character to it. This claim is now ready to be paid. Without this type of technology, I could have missed that unique seventh character. It would automatically get rejected as we move into the evolution of ICD-10. If, for example, I didn't know my ICD-9 code, I can always search by words as well. Here I'm typing in fracture. I can type in FRAC, and it immediately takes me to the chapter of fractured unspecified metatarsal. Once again, it takes me to the chapter family heading. I have to click until I see a green code. When I click that green code this time, it immediately pops up another alert telling me that I have to code whether or not this is an initial, a subsequent, a sequela, and if it's a subsequent, is it healing routinely, is it delayed or non-union? Only after I make that final choice does it populate the most specific code as well as apply that unique seventh character. Again, this is how the workflow begins to make sense. And you'll see shortly how the workflow even gets optimized further by the other thing that is actually the patent pending piece of the SmartSheet 10 technology. The patent pending piece is the Smart Super Bill. You have all probably heard that most clinicians start their revenue cycle management through the use of a super bill, whether that super bill is electronic or paper. It's a super bill that is essentially a cheat sheet for the provider that starts the revenue cycle. Well, in the world of ICD-9, that's easy. That cheat sheet or that super bill is essentially one page. In the world of ICD-10, it's impossible. That cheat sheet would become 20 pages for some specialties. The SmartSheet 10 technology mitigates that challenge for you. It allows you to set up a provider-specific super bill in a matter of 10 to 15 seconds. So what you're looking at here right now on the right-hand side of the screen is my Smart Super Bill. I've only elected 6 codes here. I could choose as many as I want. And again, because of my history as a podiatrist, I naturally selected all 6 to be podiatric codes just for demonstration purposes. But suppose I had a patient with dermatophytosis of the foot. By the way, that's an athlete's foot infection. My smart super bill right away tells me that there's a 1-to-1 match between ICD-9 and ICD-10. How do I know that? It's green already. So all I do is click my smart super bill. Because it's integrated into my electronic health record, on the left-hand side of the screen, you see what it's doing. It's populating the claim of both the ICD-9 code as well as the ICD-10 code. That's known as dual coding, by the way. SmartSheet10 dual codes simply because not every carrier is going to be ready for ICD-10. Most are ready to go with it. But, for example, workers' comp and others might not be ready. Also, you have to take into consideration the date of service. We might be post-October 1st and into the world of ICD-10, but the date of this invoice or this claim might be before October 1st. I have to submit an ICD-9 code, not an ICD-10 code. So that's the purpose of dual coding, which if it's integrated into my electronic health record, the SmartSheet10 technology takes care of that for you. Now that was an easy example because it was a patient with dermatophytosis, which is a 1-to-1 match. But on that same smart super bill, suppose I had a patient with hallux valgus again. Notice when I click on it, it doesn't come up green, it comes up yellow, telling me that there's a 1-to-many match. If I just simply click my smart super bill again, it automatically takes me right to that same database you saw before. It takes me right to the chapter heading of hallux valgus, and all I do is click until I find the green codes, and now you see it went ahead and populated the most specific ICD-10 code for me, which is the hallux valgus right foot. That's how the smart super bill works in really optimizing your workflow in the world of ICD-10. Let me quickly show you how it works with other specialties. You'll see no difference here other than the fact that it is truly specialty agnostic. On the left-hand side of the screen here, I've set up my smart super bill if I were a general surgeon. And let's say I had a patient with abdominal pain. When I click on it, I see that it's yellow. Clicking again takes me to the exact chapter in the ICD-10 database of abdominal and pelvic pain. On top, notice that it's remaining red, telling me that I am not yet at the most specific code. But if I just continue to click, the windows open up to these green codes, and it tells me I have to actually code according to the quadrant of the pain, whether it's an upper quadrant, lower quadrant, right or left. Only when I click that most specific code applicable to this patient does everything turn green, and I'm at the most specific code of right upper quadrant pain. If I were a pain management specialist, and on the left-hand side, you see I set up my smart super bill, and I had a patient with reflex sympathetic dystrophy. I simply click my smart super bill. It takes me right to the chapter heading of complex regional pain syndrome. But I have to click because now it's telling me I have to code according to whether this is an upper limb, lower limb. And it's only once I do that everything turns green and I know I'm at the most specific code. The most specific code is merely only a few clicks away to get this claim accurately paid. If I were a hematologist and I had a patient with pernicious anemia, I click on my smart super bill. It takes me immediately to the chapter heading of iron deficiency anemia. That's not enough. I have to continue to click because it's asking me to code according to the cause, the etiology of this anemia. And in this instance, it might be a patient with intrinsic factor deficiency. Once I click that, everything turns green and I know I'm at the most specific code. And the last example that I'll share with you, if I were an obstetrician, using my Smart Super Bill on the left-hand side, if I had a patient with placenta previa, I click, it takes me right to the chapter. And I continue to click because I'm forced to code according to the trimester that the patient is in. It simply doesn't allow me to make a mistake. Once I do, everything turns green. So let's talk a little bit about the pricing of the SmartSheet 10, and this can, of course, be entertained with questions later on. The next slide is going to give you an email site, but you see here in front of you the tiered pricing depending upon the number of docs that you, or the number of providers that you have in the practice, and each of these allows for the download on up to 3 machines. Now, if you're a vendor, of course, these prices are customized for you, so please don't pay attention to this particular pricing. This is for individual provider or individual practice pricing. And again, this is available to you if you return to the recorded version of this webinar that's going to be up on the TriZetto site very shortly. You will have access to this pricing, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have about this. I want to share with you lastly the email address that you can reach me at for any questions. I apologize we can't answer any live questions because there are well over 300 people logged in here. But if you simply email me at sales@smartsheet10.com, I'll be happy to address any of the questions that you might have. I want to thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope that it was educational in terms of getting you up to speed with the new CMS ruling, and I hope that you appreciated the technology that's out there right now for you to develop the best habits so that your cash flow is not going to be compromised within the next 12 months. Again, thank you, and I look forward to hearing any questions that you might have through this email address. Have a great day, everyone.